A young woman is found dead in her home in a quiet American community. There are no signs of forced entry. No immediate witnesses. The scene suggests someone she knew. Investigators begin with routine procedures. They secure the area. They collect physical evidence. They speak to family members and neighbors. Early reports indicate she had a stable life. No known threats. No history of violence around her. The case begins without a clear suspect. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing, because what happens next reveals how this system truly works. Within days, attention turns to those closest to her. Friends, co-workers, family members. Detectives follow standard protocol. They look for inconsistencies. They check alibis. They review phone records and digital activity. Nothing stands out immediately. Each person appears cooperative. Each account aligns with known timelines. The case begins to slow. Leads become limited. A funeral is organized several days later. It is attended by family, friends, and members of the community. Detectives are not present in an official capacity, but some observers note the behavior of individuals in attendance. One person, in particular, draws quiet attention. He stays close to the immediate family. He watches interactions carefully. His presence is constant. He does not display visible grief. Instead, he appears focused on the reactions of others. At this stage, nothing about his behavior is considered evidence. It is simply noted. Investigators rely on facts, not impressions. However, in homicide cases, patterns of behavior are often documented for later review. The individual is known to the victim. He has had prior contact with her. This places him within the initial circle of inquiry, but not beyond it. In the days following the funeral, detectives continue their work. They process forensic results. They analyze trace evidence collected from the scene. DNA samples are submitted for comparison. They re-examine entry points. They confirm there is no sign of forced access. This reinforces the possibility that the victim knew the person responsible. Witness statements are reviewed again. The same individual from the funeral appears in multiple accounts. Each statement is consistent in one respect. He is present. He is attentive. He is engaged in conversations, but not about the victim. Instead, he asks questions about the investigation. He asks what others have told police. He asks what evidence might exist. These details are documented. Investigators begin to build a timeline. They track the victim's last known movements. They review surveillance footage from nearby locations. They examine financial transactions. They map out her final hours. The timeline narrows. It identifies a window during which the crime likely occurred. Within that window, several individuals are unaccounted for. The man from the funeral is one of them. At this point, detectives request a voluntary interview. He agrees. During the interview, he provides a general account of his day. He states he was at home. He cannot provide independent verification. His statements are calm, measured. He does not display signs of distress. This is noted but not interpreted as proof of guilt. Investigators continue to rely on evidence. Forensic analysis begins to return results. Partial DNA is recovered from the scene. It is not immediately matched in existing databases. Investigators expand their scope. They compare samples collected from individuals within the victim's circle. This process takes time. It is methodical. It is governed by strict procedures to ensure accuracy. At the same time, digital evidence is examined. Phone records show prior communication between the victim and the man. Messages indicate a recent interaction. The content is not overtly hostile, but it suggests a meeting may have been planned. This becomes a key detail. It places him in potential proximity to the victim close to the time of her death. Detectives return to witness statements once more. They focus on behavior rather than assumption. Multiple individuals recall that at the funeral, he did not speak about shared memories. He did not engage in expressions of loss. Instead, he remained observant. He positioned himself near conversations involving law enforcement activity. He asked specific questions about investigative progress. This pattern becomes more relevant when considered alongside emerging evidence. A second interview is scheduled. This time, detectives present limited findings. They do not reveal all evidence. They ask him to clarify his timeline. His responses contain minor inconsistencies. Times shift slightly. Details change. These inconsistencies are documented. They are compared against known data points. The differences are small but measurable. Forensic comparison continues. Eventually, the DNA sample from the scene is matched to the individual. The match is partial at first, then confirmed through additional testing. This provides a direct connection. It does not, on its own, establish the sequence of events. However, it places him at the scene in a manner that contradicts his earlier statements. With this development, investigators move forward with formal procedures. They obtain a warrant. An arrest is made. The case transitions from investigation to prosecution. Evidence is compiled. Reports are finalized. The behavior observed at the funeral is included as part of the overall narrative. Not as proof of guilt, but as context. It reflects a pattern that aligns with other findings. The legal process begins. Charges are filed. The case proceeds through the court system. The evidence is presented in accordance with legal standards. The focus remains on verifiable facts. The timeline. The forensic results. The documented inconsistencies. The presence of the individual at critical points. The role of behavior in this case remains limited but relevant. It is not the foundation of the case. It does not replace physical evidence. However, it contributes to the sequence of investigative decisions. It influences the direction of inquiry. It supports the process by which attention is narrowed and evidence is examined. In the end, the case demonstrates how multiple elements come together. Physical evidence. Digital records. Witness observations. Each plays a role. None stand alone. The investigation follows a structured path. It moves from uncertainty to clarity through documented steps. The presence of the killer at the funeral is not unusual in isolation. It becomes significant only when combined with other factors. It is one piece in a larger system. A system that depends on procedure, verification, and time. The outcome reflects that process. A case that begins without a clear suspect reaches resolution through methodical work. Each detail is examined. Each assumption is tested. The result is not immediate. It is built.
Following the arrest, the case enters the pretrial phase. Prosecutors begin organizing the evidence into a clear sequence. Their goal is not to interpret behavior, but to establish verifiable facts. The timeline is reconstructed in precise detail. Every movement, every communication, every confirmed interaction is placed in order. This structure becomes the foundation of the case. The defendant remains in custody. Bail is denied due to the severity of the charge. Court records reflect the progression of the case. Motions are filed. Evidence is reviewed by both sides. The defense examines the procedures used during the investigation. They assess how the DNA was collected, stored, and tested. They review the chain of custody. These steps are standard. They are required to ensure that all evidence meets legal standards. Prosecutors focus on consistency. They align forensic findings with digital records. Phone data places the defendant in contact with the victim shortly before the estimated time of death. Location data, where available, is analyzed. While not always precise, it provides supporting context. The absence of forced entry continues to support the theory that the victim knew the person responsible. The second interview becomes a critical element. Investigators documented each response. They noted changes between the first and second statements. These differences are presented not as assumptions, but as measurable inconsistencies. The timeline provided by the defendant does not fully align with verified data. This gap becomes part of the prosecution's argument. Forensic testimony is prepared. Analysts who processed the DNA evidence document their methods. They explain how the sample was recovered from the scene. They describe the comparison process. The results are presented in statistical terms. This is necessary to avoid misinterpretation. The goal is to show probability, not certainty beyond procedure. Witnesses are also prepared. Individuals who attended the funeral are included, but their role is limited. They do not testify about intent. They do not assign meaning to behavior. Instead, they describe what they observed. Presence. Movement. Questions asked. These details are recorded as part of the broader timeline. They support the sequence of events without standing alone as proof. The defense strategy focuses on reasonable doubt. They question whether the DNA could have been transferred indirectly. They examine whether prior contact between the defendant and the victim could explain the presence of genetic material. This argument is common in cases involving known individuals. The court evaluates these claims based on the totality of evidence. As the case develops, the structure of the investigation becomes clearer. Each step follows a defined process. Evidence leads to interviews. Interviews lead to further analysis. No single element determines the outcome. It is the combination that carries weight. The system is designed to reduce reliance on assumption and increase reliance on verification. Pre-trial hearings continue. The judge reviews what evidence will be admitted. Legal standards are applied. Some material is limited. Other material is approved. This process shapes how the case will be presented during trial. It ensures that only relevant and properly obtained evidence is considered. The timeline remains central. Prosecutors refine it repeatedly. They align each piece of data to specific points in time. The goal is clarity. The sequence must be understandable and supported by documentation. Any gap is addressed. Any uncertainty is acknowledged. Throughout this phase, the earlier observations from the funeral remain part of the case file. They are not emphasized. They are not used to suggest motive or intent. Instead, they exist as one element among many. Their significance depends entirely on how they connect to verified evidence. The case moves steadily forward. There are no sudden shifts. No unexpected discoveries at this stage. The focus is on preparation, accuracy, procedure. Each side builds its position within the boundaries of the law. The outcome will depend on how effectively the evidence is presented and examined. The transition from investigation to prosecution reflects a shift in purpose. Detectives seek to identify and understand. Prosecutors seek to prove. The standard becomes higher. The requirements become stricter. Every claim must be supported. Every detail must be documented. In this phase, the system reveals its structure. It is not driven by urgency. It is driven by process. The pace is deliberate. The objective is not speed, but reliability. The trial begins with jury selection. Potential jurors are questioned to ensure impartiality. The process is structured. Both sides have the opportunity to exclude individuals who may carry bias. Once selected, the jury is sworn in. They are instructed to consider only the evidence presented in court. Opening statements follow. The prosecution outlines the timeline. They describe the sequence of events supported by forensic and digital evidence. They do not rely on interpretation. They present a structured narrative based on documented facts. The defense responds by emphasizing uncertainty. They highlight the absence of direct eyewitnesses. They question whether the evidence fully establishes responsibility. Witness testimony begins. Investigators take the stand first. They describe the initial response to the scene. They explain how evidence is collected, preserved, and logged. Each step is detailed. The goal is to demonstrate that procedures are followed without deviation. This establishes the reliability of the evidence. Forensic analysts testify next. They explain how DNA is extracted and compared. They describe the statistical significance of the match. The language remains precise. They avoid absolute statements. Instead, they provide probabilities based on accepted scientific standards. The jury is given context to understand how the evidence connects the defendant to the scene. Digital evidence is presented through technical witnesses. Phone records are introduced. The timing of calls and messages is mapped against the established timeline. Data shows communication between the defendant and the victim close to the time of death. Location data, while limited, is used to support proximity. Each element is explained in clear terms. The recorded interviews are introduced. The first and second statements are compared. Investigators identify specific points where details change. These differences are presented factually. The jury is asked to consider whether the variations affect credibility. No conclusions are imposed. The information is left for evaluation. Witnesses from the funeral testify. Their statements are consistent with earlier reports. They describe the defendant's presence. They recount his interactions. They note his questions about the investigation. The testimony remains observational. No assumptions are made about intent. The purpose is to place him within the broader sequence of events. The defense cross-examines each witness. They focus on limitations. They question the precision of memory. They challenge the interpretation of data. Forensic evidence is examined closely. The defense asks whether contamination is possible. Analysts respond by explaining the controls in place. The exchange remains technical. The defense presents its case. Experts discuss alternative explanations for the DNA evidence. They describe scenarios in which genetic material can be transferred indirectly. The argument is not that the evidence is false, but that it may not be definitive. This introduces an alternative perspective for the jury to consider. Closing arguments bring the case together. The prosecution revisits the timeline. They connect each piece of evidence to specific moments. They emphasize consistency across multiple sources. The defense returns to the standard of reasonable doubt. They argue that unanswered questions remain. The judge provides final instructions. The jury is reminded of the burden of proof. They are told to evaluate the evidence without bias. They are instructed to rely only on what has been presented in court. Deliberation begins. The process is private. Jurors review the evidence. They discuss each element. They compare testimony. They assess credibility. The timeline is examined in detail. Points of agreement and disagreement are addressed through structured discussion. A verdict is reached after this review. It reflects the jury's interpretation of the evidence within the framework of the law. The decision is delivered in court. It marks the conclusion of the trial phase, but not the end of the process. Sentencing follows, based on the outcome. Legal guidelines determine the range. The court considers the severity of the offense. Statements may be presented. The focus remains on applying the law as written. The case transitions into the correctional system. The individual is processed according to established procedures. Classification determines placement. Security level is assigned based on risk factors. Intake assessments are conducted. Records are finalized. Inside the system, structure continues. Daily routines are fixed. Movement is controlled. Communication is monitored. The environment is regulated by policy. The process that began with investigation now enters a different phase, governed by a different set of rules. The outcome reflects a sequence that begins with observation and ends with confinement. Each step is documented. Each decision is reviewed. The system operates through defined procedures, not assumptions. The individual begins serving the sentence in a state correctional facility. The environment is structured and regulated. Movement is scheduled. Activities are monitored. Interactions are documented. Each action contributes to a detailed record maintained by the institution. This record includes behavior, compliance with rules, and participation in programs. Education and rehabilitation programs are offered. Enrollment is based on eligibility and classification. Classes may include vocational training, basic education, and life skills development. Participation is voluntary in most cases but tracked. Performance is documented. This information can affect classification and privileges within the facility. Visitation follows structured guidelines. Family and approved contacts are allowed under monitored conditions. Communication is regulated. Correspondence is reviewed. These measures are designed to maintain security while allowing limited connection to the outside. The process ensures both safety and accountability. Daily routines include work assignments, meal times, and recreation periods. Each is scheduled to maintain order. Inmates are assigned tasks based on classification and institutional needs. Compliance with these routines is required. Infractions are recorded. Repeated violations may affect privileges or classification. Healthcare services are provided according to established standards. Medical intake occurs upon arrival. Regular evaluations follow. Access to mental health professionals is available. Medical records are maintained for each individual. Treatment is provided as needed, with documentation required for all procedures. Security measures remain in place at all times. Monitoring occurs through observation, cameras, and controlled movement. Staff follow protocols to prevent incidents. Any irregular behavior is noted. Serious infractions may result in disciplinary action, up to and including transfer to higher security levels. The legal process continues in parallel. Appeals may be filed. Legal representation can be maintained. The court system provides avenues for review. All filings and hearings are documented. Decisions are communicated through established channels. The process ensures that rights are preserved within the correctional system. Records of incarceration are maintained centrally. These include sentencing information, institutional behavior, program participation, and any disciplinary actions. The records are accessible to authorized personnel. They support decision-making within the correctional system. They ensure consistency in the application of policies. The overall process reflects a system designed to manage individuals following conviction. It operates through rules, documentation, and verification. Each stage is structured. Each action is recorded. Outcomes are determined by procedure rather than assumption. Observations made during the investigation contribute to this process indirectly, but the system functions independently once the individual enters custody. The case demonstrates the trajectory from crime to confinement. It shows how evidence, procedure, and legal standards interact. It illustrates the role of observation in guiding investigation. It highlights the function of structured systems in determining outcomes. The presence of the suspect at the victim's funeral becomes one element among many in a broader factual sequence. Each step is methodical and governed by standards designed to ensure fairness and accuracy. The individual remains under supervision for the duration of the sentence. Release, if applicable, is determined by statute, behavior, and institutional review. The system continues to monitor, record, and manage until completion of the sentence. Each component operates within legal and procedural frameworks. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.